as a philosophy student, has any philosophies influence on your approach to jiu-jitsu, and in which way?
That's a great question. My area of specialty in philosophy was epistemology, which is questions about the nature and extent of human knowledge. Now, with regards to my philosophy education, the sense in which it was most valuable to my approach to jiu-jitsu was a very general one, which is the idea of I was blessed to have many outstanding teachers in academia, philosophy professors, and I was able to see what made them outstanding teachers. How were they able to convey information? How were they able to crystallize and break down difficult concepts and information and relay it to us as students? And my ability to mimic that in a jiu-jitsu context was very, very valuable. So that was one sense in which just a general philosophy or academic education was useful. Breakdown and assimilation of information, of taking difficult concepts, breaking them down to their core into manageable chunks of information and relaying them to a student. Now, with regards to philosophy in particular, my area of specialty was epistemology and philosophy/history of science. So I was very much locked into this idea of what constituted a scientific method. Now, the best way to approach the sport of jiu-jitsu and combat sports in particular is through a kind of simplified version of scientific method, of trial and error method. And a huge part of my development in jiu-jitsu was the fact that my sensei, Gracie, gave us a very great amount of freedom for research. I remember one day he said to me, "John, I don't care what you do, so long as you can prove to me that it works." Okay, so the idea of proof was very, very important. There's 1,000 interesting theories out there, but what can you prove? And trial and error, of course, through sparring is the main thing. So this fostered in me a sense of looking at a jiu-jitsu training program as a research program, similar to some kind of simplified scientific research program. So it was never the case that I saw jiu-jitsu as something where you just come in, train hard, get tough. It was always about, okay, what's the problem we're trying to investigate? Understand the problem. There's not going to be any solutions until you can clearly state what the problem is. So everything begins with a clear statement of the problem. Once you have that, then it's about researching for solutions. Most of the research was simply experimentation on the mats. I had the good fortune to be teaching full-time 7 days a week for literally hours a day, many hours a day, for over a decade at Henzo's academy. And in addition, I had many brilliant students like Gracie, who came into the academy to train with us. So you had this incredible cross-fertilization of hours of training, a clearly stated set of problems, brilliant minds coming in from the outside, offering alternative points of view. And this was a unique opportunity for someone like me to try and gain as much knowledge as I could over time. As I got students around me who were enormously talented individuals, they too are brilliant and creative people. They made additions to what we were doing, and we built in a sense, a kind of a simplified scientific research program where the subject was control leading to submission. And over time, that's how it worked. So I would say, in answer to your question, there's a sense in which any kind of academic study prepares you well for the general skill of breaking down information into chunks and making it manageable for students to learn quickly. That's a general skill you learn in academic study. That was very useful. But the more specific philosophy-based skill came out of the fact that my specialty was epistemology, questions about the nature and extent of human knowledge, what constitutes knowledge, history and philosophy of science. What is the nature of scientific method? That was a big part of my PhD research. And looking at a simplified version of scientific method, a trial and error method, based around clear statement of the problem, interesting hypotheses supplied by my own research on the mat, brilliant students who were coming in and visiting and bringing alternative points of view, the work of my own students who added to the knowledge that I had given them. But they're all brilliant and creative people in their own right, and it created a research program over time which was able to have a strong influence on the sport.
Very interesting, John. Very interesting. There's Stu. Hi, John. You mentioned tomonage with regarding to throwing. Do you think this is a good start to focus on?
Oh, that's a great question. I believe that there are certain throws in the judo curriculum which are uniquely well suited to the sport of jiu-jitsu, given our unique rule sets and the unique challenges that the rules and regulations of jiu-jitsu present. If I could only have 2 throws for the rest of my life in jiu-jitsu with a gi, I would probably select tomoe-nage, especially yoko tomoe-nage, the side tomoe-nage. There are other versions, but that I believe is the most.
You put them in the hips, you throw them.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful throw. And also sumigate. Okay, if a developing jiu-jitsu student just had a strong sumigeshi and a strong yoko tomoe-nage, they would do very well. Of course, there are other throws that in time you'd want to learn, but you couldn't go wrong by starting your program with those 2 throws. They're very, very well suited for the sport of jiu-jitsu.
Very good, very good. So that asks Anne's question. What's your view on wrist locks? Since you mentioned leg locks and not ignored but largely frowned, do you think they have a place in jiu-jitsu?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. These are good questions these kids are asking. Okay, let's put out a general statement here on submissions. People are very quick to make distinctions between different kinds of locks. Okay, leg locks, arm locks, wrist locks. The lock you select is really based around how much control do you have prior to the lock. Okay, the lock is just the full stop at the end of a sentence. It's the sentence that counts, and that sentence is control. When I first started with leg locks, the great problem that I saw with leg locking in the 1990s, for example, is that there was no control. They were just moves where you jumped into it and hoped for the best. Okay, you tried to apply it as quickly as possible before the other guy could react, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. It was more or less a kind of a desperation move. As a result, the lack of control meant many injuries and a lot of failures. My whole thing was to change the nature of leg locking into a control-based game, to really make a deep study of the whole idea of ashigarami, or entangled legs, so that you could control people for long periods of time, the same way you do from the mounted position when you're working for an armbar, the same way you do from guard position when you're working for a triangle. I never say to someone, this kind of joint lock is ineffective. My question is never that. It's not, is the lock effective? My question is always, how effective is the control prior to the lock? Okay, that's the question you need to ask. With regards to leg locks, historically, the control was minimal. That's changed now. If you look at leg lock now, there's a lot of control that you can put over your opponent through the use of various kinds of ashigarami. If you look at most upper body joint locks, there's a lot of control. They come out of very controlling positions, like variations of guard, mount position, side position. These are very controlling positions. The problem I have with most forms of wrist lock is that there's very little prior control to the application of the move. So at least currently, they tend, in the majority of cases, to be moves where they can have a useful effect to get people to move in certain kinds of way. They can have a good distraction effect, but they're not a systematic, there's no systematic set of controls that lead to their application. There is one interesting counterexample to this, I do believe wrist locks can be highly effective when they are used in the context of a triangle attack. When you have someone's head and arm tied up in a triangle, but the strangle is proving to be very difficult to finish, and for whatever reason you can't switch to an arm lock on the elbow, wrist locks can be very effective there because the triangle gives you a lot of control over your opponent's movement. And so wrist locks out of triangles can be very effective because you have initial control. But wrist locks just performed in the open without some kind of prior control, much more dubious. So I do believe there is a context in which wrist locks can be an important part of your game. But again, it's not about the lock, it's about the control you have prior to the lock. If you can show me prior control to a wrist lock, I'm going to be impressed. And I believe that the best form of prior control to a wrist lock, which we currently have, is through the use of triangles. And wrist locks out of triangles can be a useful way to use that form of submission with excellent control prior to the application of a lock.
Yeah, in wrist locks, I think they work, you see more in gi because it's less slippery. It's hard to maintain the hand in position for you to bend the wrist without the gi. It's too slippery. It's hard to, to get control of the arm.
Unless you first have locked up in a triangle, then you can get it.
Yeah, fully agree.
Sumigeshi is among the most important positional moves in the sport of jiu-jitsu. It is a sweeping and throwing method that uses your legs to lift and turn an opponent onto his back so that you can get up on top of him. It works at all levels of the sport and in all weight categories. It is equally effective in both gi and no-gi jiu-jitsu. It has been used as the centerpiece of bottom guard attacks by many great athletes for generations. I believe that investing serious time in the study and practice of sumigeshi is one of the best things that you can do to improve your overall jiu-jitsu game. Sumigeshi is typically employed from seated guard, usually when an opponent is on one or two knees. But, as we shall see in this video, it is also very effective even against standing opponents as well.